So we thank you again for being patient with us, and we want to offer all of this to you.
Today we're going to be talking about a series called Let Go, Let God. Now I just wanted to talk about last week's sermon. Last week's sermon was given by Pastor Diane, and it basically meant offering it to God. Right? We are always taking control of the situation. We always think that we're in command. We're the ones that, apparently we're the ones that made the control of everything. And are taking control of everything, right? We have this feeling that we're sometimes controlling it over God. And sometimes we just have to let go and let God take over. Right? So last week's sermon, we had 3 points. The first one is God is the creator. God is the one that made it all. The second one, letting go of our old habits and the past is the only way to let God really take over. Great, we have something on the screen. Next slide, actually. And the third point is let go and let God leads to freedom. Sometimes we feel constricted by the ways that sometimes we try to control, and it gets really hard. But when we really let God take over, that's when true freedom comes in. Not the freedom that we always think about that, I'm free because I can do whatever I want. That's not true freedom. True freedom comes when we let God take over. So that was last week's sermon, and today's sermon we're going to be talking about the third installment, I believe. Yes, the third or fourth installment of the Let Go, Let God series. We're going to talk about the truth behind the prodigal son. If we can get the next slide. All right. So, who has heard the term the prodigal son? Who has heard the story of the prodigal son? Okay. All right, that's good. Maybe I should just finish here and everyone knows the story. We're all good, right? I'm trying to make my life a little bit easier to give a sermon, But yes, so I will be talking about the sermon about the prodigal son today. Sorry for those people that wanted a too short sermon, but I will be going into it today. So, the prodigal son. One of the famous quotes, I think one of the famous points of the prodigal son, if you don't know what the term prodigal, actually I didn't know this until recently. I thought prodigal meant this revered son or something that came back. Prodigal means that they spent unwisely. They just spent recklessly. So the prodigal son is actually the son that spent unwisely God's wealth, right? So the prodigal son is actually talking about a son that didn't spend his father's wealth wisely. And he did it. So we're going to go into that. But one of the famous things that actually came out, the famous quotes that came out, I'm going to read it real quick. It's the next slide. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So if you don't know this quote, essentially this term of the prodigal son, and just make it really quick because we're going to go obviously more into depth into it. But essentially the prodigal son, there's a father, there's an elder son and the younger son. Doesn't that sound familiar? We're always talking about the elder son and the younger son. There's a reason for that. I really believe that God, because we need to understand the story of relationships, God keeps giving us these relationships between elder sibling and younger sibling, right? And the father in this case as well. But the biggest famous thing that we always talk about with the prodigal son is that even though we make mistakes, we can come back to God and God will welcome us unconditionally. But I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth of what the prodigal son actually had, the story of the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son actually had. That was just more than just that little tidbit. There's so much more to that parable actually. So actually going into the parable specifically, the next slide. Going to the parable specifically. It was when Jesus was actually sitting with the sinners. He was sitting with the sinners, he was sitting with the prostitutes, he was sitting with the tax collectors, he was sitting with the low part of society, right? He was sitting and eating with them. And the Pharisees were judging them. You see these men to the left right here, they give this look like, why is this, if you can go to the next slide. Basically, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them? Imagine. You just see a man that's supposed to be high class, that's supposed to be the son of man, and he's off with the homeless people that you see on the street, and not with the godly men, right? The godly people, Pharisees, right? The Pharisees were like appalled. They were thinking that this guy is crazy. This man is crazy. What is this son of man doing, right? They were kind of appalled. And the reason for the parables actually was to tell them. And so he had a few stories. Actually, this isn't the only one. The prodigal son wasn't the only parable that he told for them to understand the story. But he also told a few other parables in order for them to kind of get the message of what God's kingdom really meant, right? And so, since the Pharisees didn't understand, Jesus had to explain through a passage. He had explained through different stories. And one of them happened to be the prodigal son. He actually told like three parables. And they were like, this guy's crazy. Still didn't understand what he was saying. But when he went to the prodigal son, so he had to tell a bigger story called the prodigal son. So, we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And the prodigal son today, we're going to be talking about three essential positions. And I told you about the father, the elder son, and the younger son. But essentially, they have a part to play in this story, right? The first, the rebel, as you can guess, is the prodigal son. The second, the unconditional, the father. And the third is actually the jealous. And this is also very important to today. Now, I'm going to talk about it, obviously, at the end, the third point, right? The jealous one, the Pharisees. Also, the elder son, right? So there's three parts. The first one being the rebel. It's the one, next slide. The rebel. That's the first position in this whole relationship. It's the prodigal son. Like I said, what did he do? So essentially, we'll go back to the story. Sorry, I speak quite fast. I'll slow down a little bit. I get quite passionate about the Bible, you know what I mean. But yes, so the story of the prodigal son is that the father was getting older and he was kind of pushed to a place where he had to divide his wealth with his children. He had two sons, like we talked about before, the elder son, the younger son, and he divided them equally. He gave them 50-50 of the wealth. You know, he knew that, of course, he already knew what the prodigal son would possibly do with the money, but he decided to do 50-50, right? Give them exactly half of his wealth. And what did this younger son do? Like his name, that's not his name, but the term that is describing him, the prodigal. He ended up taking that money, leaving, and going and squandering that money. He did it with parties. He used it on prostitutes. He used it on different things. And he just took the basically the wealth of what his father gave him, and he wasted it. He just used it nonchalantly, very recklessly, just what the prodigal term means, right? He became in a position where essentially he lost everything. The younger son lost, that's quite loud. The younger son lost everything. Right? He used everything. And he was out in the fields. Essentially, he was working as a servant for other people. Right? So this is actually a connection. The rebel, the rebel is actually an example or connection to the sinners. Right? The sinners didn't use, in the case of the Father is actually God in this case. God gave them all creation. God gave them all the situations of humanity. But what did the sinners do? What did the people that made the mistakes? Oh, I'm sorry. I already said the answer. But the sinners do. And the prostitutes and the tax collectors, they didn't use that properly. Right? They didn't use the creation properly. They just did it to fulfill their temptations. And yes, of course, there was manipulation from other people to make them go into that situation. But also, a lot of times, the younger son was in this position where the sinners, the prostitutes and tax collectors, they were just squandering all of creation. They just did whatever they wanted. And it cost them. It got them to the bottom, essentially speaking. I think Ava agrees. So it got them to the bottom, right? It got them to a situation that they were not part of any kind of godly people, as the Pharisees said. They were part of the bottom echelon of society. They weren't given the best of society anymore because they wasted all, right? But why did Jesus end up sitting with them then? Why is it so important? Why did Jesus end up going to them and eating with them? It's because, in the same sense of what the prodigal son did, if we go to the next slide, let's read this passage, Luke 15, 17 to 20. When he came to his senses, right before this, he was actually into a state where he couldn't even eat properly. He was just eating pigsty at this point because he just squandered his wealth. He was at the bottom of society already. But he came to his senses. He said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." So what did the prodigal son understand? That his father's home, his father's embrace is better than the situation that he is in right now. What do the sinners understand? That Jesus' embrace, that God's embrace is better than where they are right now. Right? It doesn't matter how many mistakes they've made or how many situations that they've made. The prodigal son can come back home. They understood that Father's love, or God's love, is that much better than what they have right now. And you might be thinking, or in many situations, it's like, oh, of course, if I'm eating out of a pigsty, anything's better than that, right? But in actual reality, I think if we ever lose God, if we ever won't stop coming to Sunday service, or if we ever have this disconnect with God, we're always missing something. Right? We're always missing God's embrace, and that's a big part of why these sinners, these people, and the younger son came back to the father, is because you're always missing something when you don't have God's embrace. No matter if you think your life is better out there, right? He thought his life was better out there. He went out to party. He thought partying was better than his father's life. Right? But actually noticing where he was at, understanding that this isn't better. This isn't better than what I thought it was. I'm at the bottom of society, and I feel like I missed out on so much of my father's love. And he understood that, so he went back. This is an ego thing too, right? Imagine, like, if I think I deserted something, and for actual sakes, I will never leave the church. But I'm just trying to think of a different situation. But if I ever, if I left. I will never leave church. But if I left my parents, for example, or whatever, and I always, had this example where, like, if I left my parents and I didn't understand, actually, my parents are moving by the end of the month. So yay for that. But if I ever, when I left my parents, it's like I thought I was getting a better life and getting better things. And maybe I was. But in many situations, I'm always missing that parental love, and this is why I've asked them to move over here so we can have that family again, right? Yeah, I mean, this is not about me. But I'm just trying to make an example. It's like, I feel like I was making a better life out there, but in actual reality, there was still something missing, right? And I had to put my ego aside. I had to put my anxiety that my parents might not accept me again or whatever. And that's not true in this case, but I'm just saying that as what might he be thinking is that might be thinking that his father might not accept him back into the family. We have to put that aside and come back to the father. Right? Come back to the parents, come back to the family aesthetic. So that's the prodigal son. This is why Jesus was sitting with them. They understood. They understood completely that they were missing God's love. And they were missing Jesus' embrace. And that's why they came, and that's why Jesus welcomed them without any hesitation. He said, guys, come, let's eat together. Let's do this. Let's make the kingdom of heaven, right? And of course, the second part, which I am going to glance over, but I think because everyone knows the prodigal son and the unconditional love and this stuff, I don't want to talk about this too much, but there is a part of the unconditional love, right? Second point, we can go next slide. Right, the unconditional love. The unconditional love. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to read the quote, continuing on the story. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. So even though the prodigal son made a whole bunch of mistakes, it's very easy for the father. I think if it wasn't God, it's very easy for the father to just, have kind of a anger towards the younger son for squandering the wealth. You've invested, guess what? This father invested half of his wealth. That's crazy. He invested half of his wealth for his son, but next thing you know, his son went out and spent it all. I'd be angry. I would be livid. Yeah? And I would be angry towards my kid for doing that. But he put that resentment away, of course. Because that's the unconditional part of the story. The father knew that he had to put away his resentment, his little stories, his own selfishness, in order to welcome up the son back into the fold. Right? And we, as a parental, either if you're a spiritual parent or you're a biological parent, sometimes we have some children that you may or you feel like you're having a few regrets about. They've made mistakes in their life. But when they come back and they see them embraced, the second biggest part of making that actually happen is that make sure that you unconditionally love them back, right? You unconditionally welcome them back into the fold. And including us as pastors, we're the parental figure in this case too. And of course, we're not older than everybody here, but we are technically the parental figure, and the elder son is the people of this congregation, and the younger son is somebody that's left the church and are trying to walk back through that door. And we, as the pastors, the parental figure, it doesn't mean that we have to completely ignore what they did in their past life. We still want to make them better, but we're going to unconditionally love them to come back in the fold, right? Back into the family. So that has to be part of the aesthetic. And just to let you know, if you ever felt like you've made mistakes in the past, even inside the church or outside the church, that as long as we're here making the difference, coming to Sunday service, coming to prayer vigils, we're making that difference to change, to become better. That's what the sinners were doing as well. They were coming back to make it better. I don't know if you know, most churches, all Christian churches, what do they say about the congregation? We're all sinners. We are trying to make life better. We're trying to come to God's embrace properly. And so unconditionally we will welcome everybody, and as well as if you're here and you feel like you've made mistakes, the fact that you're here, you're making a difference, is already part of the whole story, and it's actually making a difference already. So don't worry, God still loves you, we will still love you, no matter if there's mistakes out there. No matter if somebody walks through the doors again and they've made mistakes, we're going to welcome them with open arms. Yeah? We can learn a lot from this story. And I think the last part is actually very, like I said, the elder son is very important in this case too, because that ended up being, in this case, the jealous one. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is the third position that we wanted to talk about. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. You can go to the quote. Yeah, you're good. So this is actually the jealous one. So, guess what? What happened when the father welcomed him back into the fold? They held a feast. This is how proud that he was of his younger son coming back into the home. He was so happy for them. He was so happy for the younger son to come back and say, yes, I need your love. I need your embrace. I need this godly spirituality and everything like that, right? He was so proud. And he gave him a feast. He gave him, this is like one of the things that, you really means that you really love this person, is that he ended up cutting like the biggest calf or whatever and offering it up during the feast, right? God gave literally the biggest offering to the son in order to welcome him back to the feast. But guess what? The older son came back from the field and saw that. He was like, this is earlier in the passage, I didn't actually put the quote on the screen, but all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. And then he got really mad that his father made the decision to welcome his younger son, because the younger son just went out and just did whatever he wanted, right? Broke the rules, became a heathen or whatever. And in these terms, he was just mad that even though he slaved over and basically never disobeyed the orders, why is the younger son getting such a big treatment? He never got a calf. He never got a feast. But one thing that is actually about the elder son is that the elder son has always been there, right? And so I'm going to read this quote again. This is something that I said in the beginning of the story. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Right in the beginning, he says, everything I have is yours. You've always been with me anyway. The eldest son always had everything. He never had to be at the bottom of the pigsty eating slop. He always had this grateful part of God's kingdom. The Pharisees, in this case, are the elder son. Getting jealous of the younger son, the sinners getting all the attention from the Son of Man or whatever, or Son of God. And that's the elder son, right? They got jealous and they would always been in the kingdom. Pharisees, I don't know if you know, but they studied and have been educated in the Bible. Latin at that time. This is before Martin Luther. The Martin Luther made everything in everyone's language. That was before then. The only people that can actually read the Bible were the Pharisees, the priests, the people that have been upper echelons that have been working for God in many different ways. And so he's been there since they've been there from the beginning, right? The elder sons. And they always had, without noticing it, they've always had the Father's riches. It's not their turn. They've already had their turn. And they've already had God's love with them this whole time. They just haven't noticed it. But now it's the time for the younger son to come back, and we have to hold this feast to say that this person is no longer dead. Isn't that crazy? If you thought someone was dead and now is alive again, I would be happy. And yet this elder brother was so jealous. He wasn't grateful that his younger brother came back. He wasn't grateful. He just said, why the heck did you do that? Why did you give him everything that you had? It just doesn't make sense to me. But right off the beginning, we already told you 50-50. God already gave him half of the creation. Father already gave him half of the creation, half of the wealth, just as he did the younger son. So it's not like he had nothing. Right? And so the thing with the jealous one, it's pertaining to a lot of what we talked about earlier. I just said earlier that we as a congregation are the elder son. Right? We're the people that have been in the congregation. We've been coming every Sunday, and sometimes I've heard complaints of being also the elder son in occasions in the congregation myself, that why are we witnessing? Right? That term came up, why are we witnessing? Or why are we focusing on this and focusing on that? Why are we making it this and that? But why are we also, the one thing that I've also heard, and I know this happens in the Atlanta Family Church, is that why is this member back? Why are we welcoming them back into the congregation? They've made so many mistakes. Why are we welcoming them back into the congregation? I've heard that before. Like, why have they, if they've made so many, like, I remember this person, he's partying all the time, he's always making these things, and he's always promiscuous with his sexuality or whatever, but we're still welcoming them back. Why? I've heard that before. or if they've made different mistakes that are outside the church, inside the church, anything. They judge someone for who they are, right? But in actual reality, what we have to do as the elder son is that we, first of all, I think the Pharisees had a biggest problem in the world, is that if they're the elder son, what should the elder son, when they see their younger son struggling, making mistakes, making different things that they shouldn't be doing, the elder son should have welcomed them before Jesus even came into the fold. He should have welcomed them before the parents have even tried to reach out to them. The parents shouldn't have been trying to reach out to them. The older son, since they're closer in age, they're closer in spirituality, they should have been reaching out and understanding that the younger son should be back into the family before Jesus even tried. Jesus didn't have to do it. The elder son, the Pharisees, should have been doing it. As a congregation, we should have been doing it. And of course, when it comes to in this position as we are the parental figures or whatever the thing is, we as a congregation, we have to welcome them with open arms. And the elder son, if we haven't been reaching out to some members that are outside the church or outside the movement, at least welcoming them out when they do come back in through those doors with open arms yourself. It doesn't mean that all their past sins are completely relinquished, but the fact that they're here, again, they're repenting and making a difference. And we have to accept that. We can't be the false elder brother, the Pharisees. We have to be true elder brother. Yes, I kind of got on a roll and I completely forgot where I was. But yes, we have to be good elder brothers for anybody that comes into the fold. Anybody that has left these doors and never come back for a year or 2 months or 3 months or 7 years, and you know what they've done in the outside world, or you know what they've done here and made a mistake here, they had a bad gossip train, I don't know. But we have to welcome them back with open arms, and the elder son should be, or the elder sibling, because we're not all sons, the elder sibling should be welcoming them up with open arms, no matter what. And the Pharisees should continue, and the elder brother should continue to obviously follow God's position, God's embrace as well. They shouldn't lose that in any way. And of course, that's what the Pharisees did in Jesus' story, but I'm not saying that that's what's happening here. But, God, the Pharisees and God's elder brother, our elder son, should be working to actually still be in that fold. He shouldn't stop working on the field, right? And the prodigal son, the elder brother should not stop working in the field. And I think one of the things that we also don't understand about the younger son, and this is where the let go, let God part is that we don't truly know what this younger son has to do in the picture. For all we know, God knows. The Father knows. In this case, the Father knew that if he welcomed him back into the field, that this family is going to be complete again, in some way or another. The younger son has a part to play, and we need to let God make that decision. What did the older son try to do? He tried to go up to his dad and tell him what to do. He told God that he shouldn't welcome this person back into the family. Isn't that crazy? Imagine telling God that you shouldn't have this person part of the family. You can't do that. I'm sorry. You can't do that. And having even the resentment in your heart, that's hard. I know if you have it in your heart, you don't say it out loud, that's fine. Because you're working on it, you understand that part. But eventually, you're going to you have to feel that, let God take that position. Let God make that decision and educate. And let the pastors welcome this person back into the congregation, the family. We're not a business. I'm sorry. If this was a business, we're only getting the high educated people to make the kingdom of heaven. This is not a business. This is a family. Right? All right, we're a family, and we have to welcome everybody into the fold, including the ones that have made a mistake. So, because we need to also understand that, God sees a plan for everybody. And if their plan is to come back into the congregation, that is his plan. We should not be telling God that that's what he shouldn't be doing, right? Don't tell God that he shouldn't let somebody back in the family. That's not your right. I'm sorry. And that's not even since we're representing, the father figure in this case, we shouldn't be denying anybody from the church either, right? Because again, for us, we have to let God take that decision. We have to let God make sure that if he wants this person back in the congregation, we're letting them back in the congregation, unconditionally. That's our position. Right. All right. So one thing I just wanted to glance over. I didn't actually want to talk about too much, but there is a thing. Go to the next slide. Oh, that's hard to see, actually. Anyway, the next slide, we're talking about the father, the mother, and elder son. I don't know if you know this, but our movement has been talking about different countries as a different position in the whole family of things. I just wanted to talk about this briefly, and just so to let you know that we also have a part, since we are technically the elder son nation, that we actually have a part in the whole grand scheme of things. If you don't know, with Father and Mother Moon, we talked about having different positions for countries. The father is South Korea, the mother nation is Japan, and the elder son nation is us. And the mother nation Japan has been giving us a lot of funds, and they've been doing their part in the family. It's like a mother always wants to give embrace and stuff like that. But the elder son is actually us, ironically, right? We're the elder son nation for guess who? The rest of the world. We have to be serving the rest of the world, making sure, like I said earlier, we should welcome them into the fold. We shouldn't be denying the rest of the world into God's kingdom. I say this because sometimes we have feelings like Sao Tome and Principe, for example. If you know that story, is mother went there because they've been nationally restored, and we might get jealous that they got it or whatever it is. We have to welcome them to the fold. And I think as in the future, we have to think about this in a global scale, not just individuals in the congregation, but in the future, how do we support people that have not been in the same position as us? We're elder son, we're closer to God. We've been working at it a lot longer than the younger son has been. So how do we support, for example, maybe South Carolina, or how do we support Florida, right? We have to be the elder son in many cases, welcoming some people into the fold. I just wanted to mention that briefly, but as a bigger national world thing, we have to always think about the world view, not just our own little congregation here. So I did want to mention that. And so the last thing I wanted to end with today is actually, I should have had a recap slide, but I did not, I apologize. But before that even, I wanted to mention something that Mother Moon, we actually read it in today's prayer vigil. If you were at the prayer vigil, which I totally encourage you to join us with, which I think my wife is going to mention in the announcements later. But with our prayer vigil, we had this one quote that came up. So we go to the next slide. There's two boys. There's two, I don't know how old they are, probably 20s, early 20s or something. There's two boys, the Shin Chul and Shin Hung. They're Mother Moon, Father Moon's grandkids. And they were kind of in an elder son position of their own. And Mother was always talking about this, but they were in the elder son position of their own. And they went to a nation, and one of the things that they had to do is take care of the youth of Students for Peace. Yes. There's a program down there, or actually up here too, but they were taking care of the South America division. And what they do is they actually ended up going out and getting some ice cream, I believe, or some other kind of food. And one of the quotes that she said is, of course, they were meat, and then someone was reporting to Mother Moon about what the grandkids did. And so Mother Moon replied, of course, they were meeting their younger brothers and sisters, whom they had not seen in a long time. This is what elder brothers should do for their younger siblings. Isn't that so? Amen? Amen. We should be always having this elder son perspective of serving and giving to our younger son. Or younger siblings, sorry. Not just son, but siblings, right? No matter who goes through that door, we're going to serve them because that's the elder son or the elder sibling position. We have to always give to the younger sibling. Don't let Jesus do it first. Don't let God do it first. let the elder sibling go out and do it first, and the parents will be so much more happier to see that both of his siblings are getting along. Amen. Amen. So that is the end of the sermon. But just to recap the 3 points, I don't have the slides here. But the 3 points were essentially just the 3 positions that we had, right? The rebel, the unconditional, and the jealous. And you can actually end up being in different of these positions yourself. And think about these positions when you're going through your life. You might be the unconditional, the person that's the parent figure because you're the spiritual parent or you're the biological parent of the person you're thinking about. You might be the prodigal son that squandered his wealth or squandered his creation of what God gave to him. Or you might, and sometimes you might be, honestly, we make mistakes out there, right? And then also you might be the jealous one and you have to figure out, oh, maybe I should be just a good elder brother or elder sibling in this case. So those are the 3 positions and those are the 3 points we talked about today. And I hope that you can take that in and see maybe where you are at this point, where you figure you're out and how you can do better in the position that you're in for the people that are in your lives. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end in prayer. So please join me in prayer. Yeah, parents, thank you so much for this this time that we're here with our brothers and sisters, that we're here with our congregation. We're just so grateful that you've given us this opportunity to really be here in this one big family here. A family that we're under God, that we're going to be able to bring our younger siblings into the fold. We need to bring as many people as we can because they're all our younger siblings. We're older and we've been here for a long time, but we need to welcome our younger siblings back into the family to make sure that they feel the embrace of God. Before even God reaches out to them, we must love them first. We must be in that position where we're saying, hey God, I brought my younger sibling and back into the family, my younger son, younger daughter, back into the family. Look at how he's doing. Look at how he's making a difference, making a change in his life to become better. Thank you, Father, for everything that you've given to us. And so I pray that we can be able to keep building this family bigger and bigger because we're all part of one family. We cannot think of each other, of the people out there, as a different part of a different congregation or a different church or anything like that. We have to think of them as our younger siblings, as part of one big family. As we create this, or as we create something bigger, we will keep following you, God. We might get jealous sometimes. We might feel like we're just pushing hard and not really understanding. But we have to recollect ourselves and become true elder siblings for everybody that's out there. I pray that you can be with every single member here and every single member out there that have been hurt or been left because of different reasons. And you can be with them as we create one family under God. I pray in the name of Ilya and Diana, blessed couple. Amen.